Boker Tov, good afternoon to some folks. There's a teaching by the Maggid of Zlochov, Reb Yechiel Michal, in which he's commenting on a verse from Devarim where Moses says to the people, I stood between you and Hashem. And he's just describing, the process of his relationship with the Israelites, and he was receiving the revelation. He says, I stood between you and Hashem. And so the Maggid says, that's actually true. The I stands between you and Hashem. In other words, the sense of me that is ordinary and natural tends to create a barrier, because in life we are, it's very natural to assert our will in a certain way, as opposed to being in a state of openness to what the greater will is. And so he recommends that we be in a state of consciously offering our I to the divine. And in that sense, in offering, and we'll talk about what that means, what does it mean to offer my I to the divine? But he brings another verse from Shir HaShirim that says, Ani ledodi v'dodi li. I, meaning myself, my ego, belongs to the beloved, and therefore the beloved belongs to me. So it's a way of talking about the divine in the metaphor of a lover. And also, of course, in that metaphor is implied relation, a certain type of open relating, not an asserting of will, not an argument or a debate, but an openness and a relating. So I thought I would talk a little bit about this kavanah of offering ourselves, since this week is the beginning of Vayikra, and so the Torah portion is talking about all kinds of different offerings, and it's talking about the mechanics. It's very kind of instructional, talking about the mechanics of the animal sacrifices and the meal offerings and the kinds of oils and the incense and different stuff like that. And in order to go deeper than the surface meaning, which is, the surface meaning is very interesting, but not necessarily applicable to our actual experience, because we don't do those sacrifices anymore. But what is it really saying underneath? That these sacrifices were part of our tradition, such a major part of our tradition, and that this practice of bringing something to offer, something of value, played such an important role. So I think there are three really good points that we could get from it. The first one is really, as the Maggid of Zlochov said, which is that if we're bringing an offering in order to atone for something that we did that was not the best, we're trying to come back into alignment, then what it's saying is that being in alignment is the natural state, and somehow we've come out of alignment. That's a very different kind of image than the divine as somehow some far-off, remote thing that we have to get to. No, it's saying actually the divine dwells within our experience, that the natural state of our being is connection with the divine. Why? Because if we look at the deeper level, the divine means beingness itself. So we're already, divinity is actually the reality. And then if we do something that is an assertion of our will in a certain way, that where we're imposing or we're creating some sort of out of alignment or negativity in the world, either in relationships or just by ourselves or even in our thoughts, whatever it is that takes us out of alignment, the idea is that we can come back into alignment. The second thing is that with the offerings, since a lot of these offerings were very dramatic and had to do with an animal dying, so it's really bringing us into contact with the reality of life and death that we all know intellectually, but tends to not be in the forefront of our consciousness. That there's a certain kind of vulnerability and recognition of really deep gratitude for everything that we are receiving in this moment. Again, as we know, the default is to take a lot of things for granted because there's so much. The blessing is so overwhelmingly miraculous, so beyond anything we can ever understand, just the fact that we exist at all. How can we take that for granted? It's like the biggest thing ever because it's constant, because it's always there with us, so we ignore it. So I think we can learn from this idea of bringing animal offerings, animal sacrifices, to bring our consciousness into the fragility of our lives, and that it's not just being, but everything that's constantly supporting us, that we're constantly being blessed. Oh my God, we're constantly being blessed. And in Kabbalah, there's this concept that when you really take in and you really realize in your heart and your gut how blessed you are, then there's a natural sense of like a kind of a shame that can arise. Like who am I to receive all of this blessing? And so that leads us to this attitude which is the opposite of ego. It's the opposite of entitlement, where we can kind of have this attitude of living our lives as an offering. Which brings us to the third piece, which is that as we become conscious of these two things, first of all, conscious of all the blessing that we're constantly receiving, and second of all, conscious of how our egos might have taken over in some of our actions, how we might have done things that weren't nice or, either big or very, very tiny, whatever it is. It's not to beat ourselves up or to create a sense of self-blame or anything negative like that. It's only to sort of see ourselves truthfully, to really kind of recognize, so that then we can try to do this thing that's called teshuvah, this turning, like turn our attitude back toward coming from love, coming from a place of offering, and then doing something, taking some action. What's the big danger of ritual sacrifices? It was already talked about in the prophets before the sacrifices dropped away. Hundreds of years while the sacrifices were still going on, the prophets had some not nice things to say about the sacrifices, because the tendency, of course, is just to think of it as a magic ritual, right? You did something wrong, you don't want Hashem to get mad, so you bring the right offering, and then you can avoid the negative consequence. Yeah, so I did it, I brought my offering, but there's no inner transformation. So that's what, and then of course corruption can seep into the whole system, and that's what the prophets were railing against. They had, the Hashem says in some of those books, I don't want your sacrifices. What do I want? I want the heart. And the Christians really picked up on that and ran with it. Traditional Judaism, of course, still has this, we're going to bring back the sacrifices. But none of that's the point. The point is just to recognize that what the sacrifices embodied was our power to do something to come back into alignment, that we can bring ourselves back into the right intention from the heart, of it, attention of coming from love, coming from offering, the opposite of ego, and then we can do something to embody it. That's our practice, that's our avodah. And that's why the rabbis picked up on this idea that now the prayers of our lips will substitute for the bowls. Well, because the point is to do something, to embody the right kavanah, so that we can work on ourselves, so that we can extricate ourselves from the power of ego, or the power of what is sometimes called Yetzer Hara. Thank you for watching. I hope it was helpful to you. If it was, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and click the bell to receive notifications when new content is uploaded, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Another great way to support Torah of Awakening and also gain support for your own awakening is to become a member. You can try it free for 1 month, and when you do, you'll be able to meditate along with our growing community by tuning into our weekly live streams or watching later at your convenience. You'll also access hundreds of archived videos and audio recordings, Hebrew chants, guided meditation sessions, and much more. You'll also be able to have a free intro spiritual coaching call with me, as well as an annual call included in the membership. You can join 1 month free at TorahofAwakening.com. Torah of Awakening is all about helping you to access the spacious depths of your own being beyond your mind and your feelings. This is sometimes called pure consciousness or pure awareness, also traditionally known as the soul. The more you come to know this eternal dimension of your being, which is really your own divine nature, the more freedom you'll have from stress and negativity, and the more creativity, joy, and peace you will feel. In fact, everything in your life, from work to relationships to health, will all benefit from Torah of Awakening meditations and teachings. So why put it off? It's free for a month. Just go to TorahofAwakening.com and sign up, and I'll see you there. All blessings.